Hey everybody, how's it going? Self-isolation working out for you okay? Yeah? Me neither, really. I miss you guys too much. And now it's Wednesday, and I got thinking this morning that surely there was something that I could come up with. So you can see, I've been hanging out with some of you. You can see that I've got my little space set up here. I've got all my musical instruments over here. Got my bikes, of course. The other thing that I have is I have all my books, right? So I've been reading lots of books. With some of you guys, I've even been talking about the books. And I thought this. Hold on. I thought that what I might do is I might pick up on our reading of Harry Potter and do it together. So each day what I would do is I would post a little bit of the chapter that we're on and then send it out through email like this, post it up on YouTube. And that way we could keep going with our story. I hope that sounds like a good idea to you. So anyway, here's what I'm going to do. First off, I'm going to take out my Harry Potter glasses. We were on the chapter called The Midnight Duel. So I'm going to read just like a few pages of it, and then we'll pick it up again afterwards, okay? And we'll go from there. It could be sort of like we're in class, but there would have to be like added sections to it, right? Here, I'll give you an example. It'd be like this. All right, is everybody ready? Here we go. We're going to read some stuff. Boys at the back. Boys, shh, shh, keep it down, okay? Joseph, you ready? Okay, here we go. Max, shh, shh, shh. Okay, here we go. Olivia, are you ready? Abby? Okay, here we go. Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed he would meet a boy he hated more than Dudley, but that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with the Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up in the Gryffindor common room, which made them all groan. Flying lessons would be started on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. Typical, said Harry darkly. Just what I always wanted, to make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He'd been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. You don't know you'll make a fool of yourself, said Ron reasonably. Anyway, I know Malfoy's always going on about how good he is at Quidditch. I bet it's all talk. Malfoy certainly did talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house Quidditch teams and told long, boastful stories which always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he'd spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who'd listen about the time he'd almost hit a hand glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron had already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory about football. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball where no one was allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron prodding Dean's poster of West Ham football team, trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life, because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she'd had good reason because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents even with both feet on the ground. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This wasn't something you'd learn by heart out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all stupid with flying tips she'd gotten out of the library from a book called Quidditch Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on to her every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to the broomstick later, but everybody else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of the post. That's the mail. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's eagle owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he opened gloatingly at the Slytherin table. A barn owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. "It's a Remembrall," he explained. "Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this, and if it turns red... Oh. His face fell because the Remembrall had suddenly glowed scarlet red. You've forgotten something. Neville was trying to remember what he'd forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the Remembrall out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy, but Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. What's going on? Malfoy's got my Remembrall, Professor. Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the Remembrall back on the table. Just looking, he said, and he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle behind him. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps into the grounds for their first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward a smooth lawn on the opposite side of the grounds of the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks laying in neat lines on the ground. Harry heard Fred and George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you flew too high, or always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madame Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well, what are you all waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone stand by a broomstick. Come, hurry up!" Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck at odd angles. Sam, Connor! Guys, what are you doing? Listen, okay? Stick out your right hand over your broom, called Madame Hooch at the front, and say, "Up! Up!" everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Hermione Granger's had simply rolled over on the ground, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quaver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madame Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy that he'd been doing it wrong for years. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off from the ground. Hard," said Madame Hooch. "Keep your broom steady, rise a few feet, and then come straight back by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle, 3, 2... But Neville, nervous and jumpy, and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had touched Madame Hooch's lips. "Come back, boy!" she shouted. But Neville was rising straight up, like a cork being shot out of a bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground, falling away from him, saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher and started to drift lazily towards the Forbidden Forest and out of sight. Madame Hooch was bending over Neville, her face white as his. "Broken wrist," Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy, it's all right. Up you get." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, his face streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madame Hooch, who had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot than Malfoy burst into laughter. "Did you see his face, the great lump?" The other Slytherins joined in. "Shut up, Malfoy," snapped Parvati Patel. "Ooh, sticking up her long bottom," said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. "Never thought you'd like a fat little crybaby, Parvati." "Look," said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. "It's that stupid thing Longbottom's Gran sent him." The Remembrall glittered in the sun as he held it up. "Give it here, Malfoy," said Harry quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to collect. How about up a tree?" "Give it here," Harry yelled, but Malfoy had leapt onto his broomstick and taken off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of an oak, he called, "Come and get it, Potter!" Harry grabbed his broom. "No!" shouted Hermione Granger. "Madam Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all in trouble." We'll pick up there again. See you later, everybody. Sam! Connor!